the flies, fruit flies, and all the flies, they chew on this mushroom. They're not affected at all.
Interesting.
Nematodes are not affected.
Now, what if you ate the fly? Then would you think you would have some issues?
Good question. If you eat a lot of flies that are recently digested,
I've been known to eat a lot of flies.
Probably.
Yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today. This is going to be a fun talk today because we're going to be talking about fungi or fungi, whatever you prefer. But we've got somebody who's an absolute expert. We've got JP Xu, and he could probably say his name better than I can. Go ahead.
Xu Jianping.
Xu Jianping.
Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful human being, Department of Biology down there at McMaster University up there in Canada. But yeah, we're going to talk about some fun stuff today. So let's just start basically like what made you want to study fungi?
Thanks for having me. I got into the area of fungal research. Now, this is over 30 years ago by accident. In a seminar that I heard, one scientist was describing the number of sexes that a fungi can have. He was saying that those hundreds and thousands of sexes, that really intrigued me. Said, how could they have that many sexes? So I started digging in and identified the potential species that could be of interest for investigation. And then progressively, I found that some of them are really delicious as well, not only biologically interesting, but delicious. So then I started looking at the fungi and looking at the mushrooms, and from edible mushrooms to poisonous mushrooms to human fungal pathogens and plant fungal pathogens, and then of course to some of those beneficial symbiotic fungi that are associated with plants as well. So many different species over the span of last 30-some years.
So when we think about fungi or stuff like this, we usually think about mushroom with a little cap and a little stem and stuff. But what are some of the like the ones we don't think about? I mean, you have stuff like black mold and you have stuff like skin issues. What are some of these varieties that the fungi kingdom encompasses?
Yeah, there are many, many different types of fungi, as you just mentioned. So that's based on morphological form. Some of them could be unicellular, just like bacteria. So those include many of the yeasts, including the baker's yeast, the brewer's yeast, the bread, and the yeast that causes human infections, like Candida, Cryptococcus, etc. So those are unicellular form. And then we have many fungi that grow as filaments, filamentous fungi. And those fungi can also produce many spores as well. Those spores are unicellular. Okay. And then still some fungi, like what you mentioned, the mushrooms, can assemble their hyphae into multicellular form that form a visible fruiting body that we can see with our naked eye. So there could be many different forms morphologically. Some of them we typically don't see using our naked eye, and some of them we can during certain stages of their reproduction, like the sexual reproduction structure, which is what the mushrooms are. It's really one stage of their life. And most of the stage of their life, they're just mycelium in the soil or in the wood, in the plant roots that we don't see. One thing that I quite often mention to my students is that if you go out into a deciduous forest, it's very difficult to find a leaf that is not infected. And almost every leaf that you see in a deciduous forest would have some kind of fungal infection. So, but typically we do not see it. We do not think about it as that, oh, the leaves are beautiful.
Yeah, right. We wouldn't be able to have certain, like the plants we eat and the agriculture we have. Isn't this highly dependent on fungus?
Absolutely. So almost all crops and all plants have fungal pathogens that can infect them. And some of them can have up to 100 different fungal pathogens, causes dozens of different diseases, from the roots to the stem to the leaves and the fruits. Almost all parts of most of the crops could be infected by fungi. And indeed, it's estimated that about 30% of the productivity loss or productivity in crops were reduced by fungal infection. 30%. Just imagine how many people can feed if we were able to get rid of those fungal infections.
So, but in industrial agriculture, should they be paying more attention to the balance of fungi? Because it doesn't seem like they do right now.
Some of them do, but one of the things that is happening is that when we apply fungicides, agricultural fungicides, to control those fungal infections of our crops, those impose a selection pressure on the environmental fungi in the soil. And some of those environmental fungi are also opportunistic human fungal pathogens and animal fungal pathogens. And those resistance that are selected by those agricultural fungicides could end up impacting treatment options to patients who are infected with the same fungi.
You're trying to get rid of the bad ones, you end up getting rid of the good ones.
Yeah, that's one of the unfortunate side effects. Yes.
Well, hopefully we move past that and start doing more selective, more sustainable, ecology when it comes to that stuff. You also get deep into the genetics of mushrooms. How does that work? How do you get to study the genetics of it? And what was your journey?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So when I was a PhD student at the University of Toronto, I was looking at the genetic resources of the butter mushroom, which is Agaricus bisporus. This is the white butter mushroom that we typically have in our stores. So I was collaborating with colleagues from the US and France and the Netherlands, looking at all the cultures that were collected and using molecular genetic markers. Those are DNA sequence-based markers to look at how much variation there is among strains, sometimes within strains, and how geographical populations are related to each other. So fundamentally, how we look at population genetics, look at the mushrooms genetically, are really not very different from looking at bacteria, plants, or fungi. We use the same kind of tools, and we use the same kind of genetic crosses and analysis analytical method to infer the diversity of those strains and how the genetic variation might be related to the phenotypic variation. For example, disease resistance. So mushrooms also have diseases.
Oh, really?
They could be infected by bacteria, like bacterial broach. They could be infected by a virus, like La France disease, and it could be infected by some mold. And in fact, in some of the mushrooms, the parasitic fungi on the mushrooms eventually take over and make the mushroom more flavorful than the original mushroom. So,
that's crazy. Yeah. Well, today I went to the store and I got some champignons, the short little guys, and they smelled like fish, and they had the white kind of mycelium growing on them. I probably shouldn't eat this, should I? If they have of old order and if they have slimy stuff, I suggest that you don't eat that. Well, I'm glad I asked you because, I almost did. So fungi, you've also studied the interactions of fungi with the human body, and we talk about ones that are not good for you. They're poison. They get in your lungs. They can give you rash, stuff like this. Are there symbiotic fungi that is good for us that we don't think about?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two groups of fungi that we typically consider to be very beneficial to us indirectly, and those are associated with plants. So that one type is called the ectomycorrhizal fungi. Another one is called the endomycorrhizal fungi. And those fungi, they can infect the plant roots and then help the plants obtain water and minerals from the soil. And those nutrients and water are then delivered to the plants. So this is very, very important for many plants. In fact, it's estimated almost all terrestrial plants have mycorrhizal fungi as the symbiont in order for them to grow. And one hypothesis was actually that the fungi, the mycorrhizal fungi, are the ones that enabled the plants to transition from aquatic environments to terrestrial environments.
And so
hundreds of years ago.
That's so cool. And underground, when these kind of mycorrhizal funguses get going, how do they act? Do they share nutrients with each other, or what's going on down there?
Yeah, very good question. So they do. There's an underground mycelium network that allow plants, or different plant species, or different plants of the same species to exchange nutrients, because some of those mycorrhizal fungi can form vast underground network and can form symbiotic relationship with multiple plants. You do see that.
That's so cool. In my gardening experience, I have used mycorrhizid, kind of a dust, and you sprinkle it on the roots when you transplant, and the result I get is pretty phenomenal difference. So in your research, what has been some of the most amazing kind of discoveries or surprises that you've come across? Yeah, one of the things that we talked about earlier, but I did not fully answer the question, was some of the potentially unique aspects of working with fungi that we typically don't run into when we work, say, with plants. Fungi, typically we do not see them in the environment. As a result, when you try to collect them, you cannot see, so there's a lot of ambiguity in there. But some of the fungi flute, but the fluting is very dependent on environmental conditions. So they don't flute all year round. Quite often they form fruiting body within a few days. This is in the forest. Within a few days, the fruiting body would die out, and then you will never see them again until the next season, or maybe sometimes next year. So that imposes quite a lot of constraints on how many samples we can get for analysis, for study. Unlike plants, they're always there. Yeah.
They don't move. And for animals, you can use trackers, but the fungi, you can't. Yes, so it's very dependent on the environmental condition to obtain your sample for analysis.
Do you find that between the animals, plants, and fungi, is fungi kind of understudied? Should we be looking more at it, or?
Absolutely, yeah. It's really understudied, but there's increasing interest due to increasing prevalence of fungal infections. That I guess this is one area that we're going to get into. Almost everybody is infected with fungi, and most of us will have at least one episode of fungal infection in our lifetime.
Really? So what are the most dangerous types of fungal infections, and what is generally the medicine that they would try to use to fight it? WHO, the World Health Organization, recently published a priority list of fungal pathogens that impact humans. So I have already talked about one group, Aspergillus fumigatus, which is the mold, very common mold. So that one, causes 3 to 4 million infections. About 10% of those would end up dying from it. Another one is Cryptococcus.
crypto means it's hidden behind a capsule. Coccus is just a round cell. So that species also causes about 200,000 deaths each year. And then there's Candida, which is the dominant species causing fungal bloodstream infection. It's reported to be responsible for about a quarter or more of all bloodstream infections by microorganisms.
What?
And this Candida, they can also cause yeast infection, like over 70% of.
Is that the one that you can tell by the tongue? You can look at the tongue and see that is that the one?
Yeah, so that one for AIDS patients, I think in the initial stage, over 90% of them have oral thrush, and those were caused by Candida.
Wow.
So medically, they are very important. And for immunocompromised people, we have very, very few options to counter them. There are a few categories of drugs that have been developed, but because of the high evolutionary similarity between fungi and animals, there are relatively few drug targets. And some of those have been developed, have drugs developed. But unfortunately, drug resistance have been reported for all the known categories of antifungal drugs.
Wow. Evolution is generally faster than human-made medicine, I find. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So it takes us tens or more years to develop a drug, and usually a couple of years later, after you apply them, you find the drug-resistant strains.
They're smart. They're smart little mushrooms. They know what they're doing. They're fungus. They know. Also, antibiotic-resistant diseases are going to be possibly a thing in the future. So you might know about this. This is completely off topic, but yeast is a form of fungi you mentioned. There is a yeast that can get trapped in the stomach and take the water that you take in and kind of brew alcohol and kind of keep you drunk. Is this a real thing?
So the beer making, wine making, and vodka making, all of them were due to the actions of the yeasts. They take different forms of sugar in the presence of liquid and the absence of oxygen. They will undergo fermentation. And the product of that fermentation, one of the products is alcohol. So I make beer at home, and I made wine at home. We just put a package of yeast with malt and with other kind of ingredients, and they will ferment, with the airlock. They will ferment. In the absence of oxygen, the alcohol will build up. Yeah. So those, certainly our gut and the gut of many animals represent a similar kind of anaerobic environment, where if there's a sugar in there with water, anaerobic, the yeast will get there and they'll ferment.
Wow.
Yes.
Isn't that funny? I mean, anaerobic, aerobic, right? Those are the two. And anaerobic is just like vacuum, dark, no air, no oxygen, right?
Yeah, just no oxygen. It could be, doesn't have to be dark.
Okay.
No
Okay. So we're talking about brewing beer. You probably grow mushrooms a little bit. Do you do a little bit of maybe making some pickles or kimchi or something? Now, is there benefits to fungi in the gut? And do these kind of things improve? Are they probiotic in that way?
That's a very, very good question. So there's some evidence that some fungi can be beneficial to certain groups of people. I have not seen conclusive evidence that those human fungal pathogens, or the ones that typically inhabit us, that colonizes us, have demonstrated beneficial effect. Well, partly because it's difficult to have controlled trials. But certainly, if you were to compare healthy and unhealthy individuals, in humans and healthy and unhealthy individuals of animals, you will find that their microflora, this is the fungal component of the microflora, can be different. It can be quite an obvious difference.
Wow.
And one of the things that it's probably very ambiguous and clear conclusions are very difficult to draw is that some fungi in one environment they can be beneficial. In another environment they can be harmful.
Now,
so for example, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, that's the one that we talked about, the fermenting and making beer and making bread and making wine for us. Typically, for most people, it doesn't cause any disease. But in immunocompromised people, specific subpopulation of even this species can cause bloodstream infection, can cause yeast infection in the vaginal tract. So,
wow. Well, you have to be careful if you think you're immunocompromised. Yeah. Take it easy on the homemade bread and the homemade. Wow.
Yeah, homemade bread is okay. Homemade beer, because there's still live yeast potentially. You need to be a bit more careful.
So when you bake the bread, you've basically taken yeast. Okay, all right. Well, I make homemade tortillas, and sometimes I put the yeast in, and it gets cooked. But sometimes I think there's a bit of powdery bit, and I worry that I'd get some. I don't know.
So most of the strains that are used in baking and brewing, they are unable to survive at 37 degrees, like replicate the 37 degrees effectively. But there's subpopulation of that species that can.
Okay.
So it's just the subpopulation of the same species.
This is why we don't use the stronger ones to make stuff that we're going to eat, probably, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow. This is so cool. This is such a great talk. So you've been a lot of places. You've traveled quite a bit. And I know I asked you this before, but where are some of the places in the world that you found some of the best mushrooms or the most interesting mushrooms? What's one of your favorite places to go mushroom picking?
Yeah, 2 years ago, is it 2 years ago? No, a year and a half ago, we went to Newfoundland for a trip. And Newfoundland is one of the paradise for chanterelle.
Oh, chanterelles. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I was really surprised by the amount of chanterelle in Newfoundland. So we collected a lot and had a big feast of chanterelle. And then I also, for each of those mushrooms, this was a vocation. Was not a research trip.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I could use this material for genetic analysis as well. So we end up publishing 2 papers on the chanterelle from Newfoundland.
Never taking a break. Never. Always working.
Yeah, but the favorite place that I have actually is in southwestern China. So that's the Henduan Mountains in the foothills of the Himalayan plateau. Over there, within a very short distance, you can have many different habitats, different ecological niche, different forests, different climates. So you see many different types of mushrooms in that area. So over there, I have had the pine mushroom, the truffles, the morels, chanterelle, you name it. All the exotic mushrooms that are priced out of reach in most of restaurants in Western countries. But one of the ones that I really, really liked is actually the termitomycetes. So those are the mushrooms that are formed on termite mounds. And they are just very crispy and very flavorful. Have you had it?
No, I've never even heard of it.
Yeah, the termitomycetes. Yeah, if you get the chance, you should try it.
So they grow on top of termite mounds?
Yeah.
Why?
So the mycelium would penetrate through the termite mound into very, very deep. So termites, as well as many other ant species, such as anthian species, they actually use fungi to convert plant matter, for example, the wood or leaves, into food for them. So they maintain a garden of fungi. And then the maintenance it's very difficult sometimes because they have to keep to make sure that their garden, their mound, is free of contaminants, right? So they would culture microorganisms that will kill the contaminants and keep the mushroom fungi that they want to consume to be pure and to colonize the substrate that they bring in, so that they can get the food, very pure food, very reliable food, instead of for contaminants.
That is so cool. They're like little gardeners. They got like a little pitchfork and a little straw hat, and they're out there farming. And that's so cool. How do they know which is a contaminant, and how do they get rid of it? Do they eat it, or do they move it out of the way?
Well, for one of the groups of ants, the anthidian ants, they actually have not microorganisms that produce very strong antibiotics. Wow. And the mushroom fungi is resistant, is not affected by the antibiotics, but other contaminants are affected. And if there's a lot of contaminants in there, they'll simply move away and then establish a new one, making sure that they have this pure culture to start the new colony.
That's neat. And so the mushroom at the end, when you go and pick, it's very crispy and delicious.
It's very delicious. Yeah, that was my favorite. And I had one that was like huge, the Mitomyces, and that one was one meal, and several people we ate it together, enjoyed it together.
Wow. So everybody has this a fear when they go out and they pick mushrooms. Well, if they don't get the right one, they could get poisoned and they might die. So what percentage of the mushrooms do you know that are poisonous, and which ones will just kind of make you temporarily sick? And which ones, how many are actually delicious?
Yeah, it's estimated about 1% of the mushrooms are deadly poisonous. That is, they are poisonous to everybody, regardless. And then there's a higher percentage that can upset certain people's stomach.
Okay.
But the amanitas, and then a few species in a few other genera that produce the toxins, like amanitin and a few other kind of toxins. Those ones have a target in our cells that will stop us from producing energy, ATP, in the mitochondria. It will shut down the transcription of the energy generating apparatus. And once we are out of ATP, we're done. So those ones, about 100 of those that are poisonous to everybody we know of, all humans.
Okay. And the ones that we know that are edible and delicious, they're very well documented.
They are very well documented. However, there's always a catch, right? There was a recent report that a teenager in Spain got an allergic reaction, very severe allergic reaction, by eating pasta that contains the butter mushroom, and identified the allergen within the mushroom. This is the globally most broadly cultivated and sold mushroom among all the cultivated ones. But you still have certain people who might develop allergy towards specific proteins.
Specific proteins. Okay, I was going to ask what specific part of the mushroom did it react to, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a specific protein. So the allergens are protein, small protein.
So, but this was an anomaly, right?
Yeah, this is an anomaly. But so what I want to mention is that there are always people who might be allergic to some components of some mushroom. Or actually, most mushrooms will contain some components that some people might be allergic to.
Yeah. So what about animals? Have you found some interesting stories about animals that can eat a specific kind of mushroom that would absolutely kill humans?
Yeah. So the ones that I talked about, the Amanita.
Yeah.
So the Amanita family, the ones that contain the amanitin poison. Some species, they're just not affected. For example, slugs. They're not affected. Even I don't think mice was even affected. So they're trying to do studies. This I have to confirm. But the slugs, they like to eat, and the flies, fruit flies, and all the flies, they can eat. They chew on this mushroom. They're not affected at all.
Interesting.
Nematodes are not affected.
Now, what if you ate the fly? Then would you think you would have some issues?
Good question. If you eat a lot of flies that are recently digested,
I've been known to eat a lot of flies.
Probably.
Yeah. I mean, it happens. It happens.
Yeah. But typically, those protein components will probably be digested very quickly once they are ingested
Oh,
by
interesting.
the animals. They're digested by the enzymes, and they convert to non-poisonous compound.
Yeah. I always wonder between all the animals out there. I know, vultures have an incredible stomach acid. They could pretty much digest nails and stuff. So I'm always wondering about that. Yeah. Well, this is fun. So, any fun projects for you in the future? Do you have anything going on that you're looking forward to that you're going to go research, or are you at the moment, are you teaching a lot?
I teach typically 2 courses per year.
Okay.
So it's not too much.
Oh, okay.
And most of my effort is on research. I have 7 graduate students, including 4 PhD and 3 masters currently, and about a dozen undergraduate thesis students. But a few questions. So we work with a diversity of fungi. Primarily in my lab here, we work on fungal pathogens. But then my collaborations with other people in Europe, in Asia, in other parts of North America, we work on plant fungal disease agents and work on mushrooms. So it's very, very broad. For the ones that we work on here, I mentioned Aspergillus fumigatus. I mentioned the Cryptococcus neoformans, Candida species that we work on. Recent one that we for Candida is a population from Qatar of Candida glabrata, and we found a tremendous amount of diversity in such a small country in the Middle East. Their genetic diversity for this fungal pathogen is similar to the rest of the world. It's just incredible.
Is that that's not really a moist climate, is it?
No, it's very dry. I mean, they have the climate over there very close to the sea, to the Persian Gulf. So they have access to water.
Right.
It's very hot.
Yeah.
In a small area, and have a huge amount of genetic diversity. And we also work on the white nose syndrome fungus it's killed several millions of bat species in North America, and was likely introduced by a German about 16 years ago from caving, brought the pathogen to North America.
Oh, so it was an invasive issue.
Yeah. So we're working on identifying ways to use probiotics to prevent and control white nose syndrome disease on North American bats.
Wow. Are you confident that antibiotics would work at battling them?
So this is probiotics.
Probiotics. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So in our in vitro experiments, it's very effective. And we have started applying the probiotic cocktail. So we have 4 bacteria that have different properties. We mix them together and we apply them. They're very safe for the bats, and we have applied them for a couple of years. So far, looks like they are colonizing and sustaining in the bats, on the bat wings in BC, in British Columbia. And in British Columbia, right now, it's the only province that we have not had reported white nose syndrome in North America, almost. And now, this year, Washington State, which has the white nose syndrome disease in their bats, are also going to be receiving our probiotic cocktail. So we're going to see how effective it is. But so far, it looks good. It looks promising.
You're saving the bats. I love you. You're great. Thank you. You're the unsung hero. What are some of the symptoms of the disease in bats? Is it pretty horrible? Can it kill them?
Yeah. So the little brown bats, the myotes, etc., they're all killed by them because those bats in the northern climate, they hibernate in the winter. So when they hibernate, they don't move around, and usually they hibernate because there's no food around, right? So what happens is that this fungus is a cyclophytic fungus in that it likes to grow in cold temperature. So in a cave in the winter, it's just perfect for them, 14 degrees-ish, etc. That's the optimum growth temperature. And they would colonize the bat's wing and the bat's mouth, nozzles, etc. And they would grow. Bats are just there as sitting duck.
Sitting bat.
Sitting bat. And once they start growing on the bat's skin surface, they disturb the homeostasis.
Okay.
Therefore, the bats start losing water, and then they wake up. Now they wake up, there's no food available. Because most North American bats, especially at least in northern climate, they are all insectivores, in that they eat insects. In the winter, there's no insect. So there's no food for them. Therefore, they wake up, flying around, and then no food, they die very, very quick.
Yeah, that's a shame. We love our flying little furry mammal brothers.
Actually, they provide a huge amount of ecological service and agricultural service. Each of them in the summer, they eat the equivalent of the body weight of insects every day.
Wow. And the nutrients that come out the backside, wonderful.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they are very nutrient rich, nitrogen rich, and those bat guanos is sold as very precious fertilizers.
Yeah. I used to get it, but then I realized it was not so always sustainable, but it worked so well. Very rich. But so we were talking about the conditions in which some of these fungi can exist. Can they exist in saltier ocean temperatures? Are there desert fungi?
Absolutely, both. Desert fungi are available, and quite often those desert fungi are associated with algae. Together they form lichen. And they are the pioneers in many of the extreme environments. You can find them in the Antarctica. You can find them in Ellesmere Island in North America. You can find them in the deserts. Those are the lichen. Okay, they're the pioneers. And absolutely also, you can find them in saltwater environments.
Wow.
So one of the species that we recently worked on with my colleagues in India was Candida auris. And this one has been in the news for the last few years because it's resistant to multiple antifungal drugs. And it's one of the 4, so I mentioned you 3 of the priority fungal pathogens. The 4th one is Candida auris. And since its discovery, reportedly in 2009, it has caused hospital outbreaks in over 50 countries. This fungus, it's very resistant to a lot of environmental stress, like 10% of salt water, 10% of salt in water. It's not going to kill them. They're very resistant to salt stress. They are resistant to high temperature. And we have found this fungus in the salt marsh around the Andaman Islands in the Bay of Bengal, around the Indian Ocean. That's the first reported natural ecological niche for this fungus. We found it the first time. Previously, it's only reported in humans and in hospital environments. Then we were able to identify through that ecological survey. That is from the ocean. And that fungus has been suggested as one of the ones, probably the first one, that recently emerged due to climate change.
Yeah, there you go. What you're saying is it's kind of scary. We're facing maybe a whole new type of a kind of pandemic or global catastrophe with these type of fungi. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are new emerging fungi all the time. They could be impacting our crops, affecting our food, impacting animals, impacting us as well. So the number of fungal species that can cause human disease are increasing. And the number of fungal species that can cause plant and crop diseases are also increasing.
Oh my God. And then you hear nothing on the news about this. And now I'm scared.
Yeah. So I guess you must have followed the Last of Us, this new show.
Yeah.
So there's some scientific truth to some of those premises that set the foundation for the movie. Climate change.
But it's not specifically accurate, right?
It's not specifically accurate. We don't have a pathogen yet.
You're really trying to scare me, aren't you? Yeah.
So I hope you can sleep well tonight. After all.
Yeah, but this show or then the video game is based on a kind of a parasitic kind of brain controlling fungus. Is that right?
Yeah. So actually, multiple fungal species have been found to infect insects, and one of them, which I also worked on, it's called the Cordyceps. Cordyceps sinensis, and that one is actually used as one of the most expensive Chinese traditional medicine. The per weight, it's worth more per gram than the per gram of gold. So 1 gram of that thing is worth more than 1 gram of gold.
Okay. What's the idea of the medical application for that though? What? So
this fungus the spores would be picked up by the insect, by the larvae, and the fungus would grow inside the insect. And actually, the multiple insect species are susceptible to this, including ghost moth and etc. And then the fungus would grow inside and then progress to take over the entire insect body. Once it's completely colonized the insect, it chews up a fruiting body. And that fruiting body, along with the insect together, we call it as a mummified insect larvae, contain a lot of secondary metabolites, which were produced by the interaction between the fungus and the insect and the moth. So within there, they used to call it the Himalaya Viagra. It's primarily found in the Himalaya mountains. Okay, purportedly to have this effect, rejuvenation effect.
How much does Western science confirm this?
Not much.
That's all right.
There's no controlled experiment, but like a lot of the herbal medicine, clinical trial data is lacking.
I'll still try homeopathic stuff before I go to the harsh stuff. But yeah, it sounds wild.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask you one more question, and then I'll let you get back to your life. Obviously, magic mushrooms. What's going on there? I take it magic mushrooms. I've had a great time, and it's what's happening in the mind, and what's to account for this effect on the brain. And do you give any credence to the idea that apes used to? The reason that we evolved as humans was because we ate psychedelic mushrooms.
That's probably a little bit of far-stretched.
Sure.
Certainly, many mushrooms, not only the psilocybes, many mushrooms have found to produce compounds that can impact our neurotransmission system, our mood. Okay. Like the Japanese, when they eat the pine mushroom, the matsutake, they like the aroma and just make them very happy. That's why I think sometimes they pay so much money to buy it. One slice for the whole family. It becomes a ritual, and it becomes a symbol of harmony and stuff. So for psilocybin, certainly there have been demonstrated effects. And certainly there's evidence from several thousand years ago, the pottery age and etc. You have seen pictures of mushrooms resemble psilocybin mushrooms, and people were dancing around those celebrations. So people have used psilocybins for ceremonies and etc. And certainly there's demonstrable medicinal benefit. But like most drugs, it's very susceptible to overuse. Probably different people would be susceptible to different kinds of dosage threshold beyond which becomes harmful. So regulations are needed in order to.
Sure. A certain amount of legalness so that the science can study it accurately. And then also, dosage is always the most important part. Well, I've done my own science on the matter, and there's something beneficial without a doubt, but it is about dosage, and it is about what's bothering you. And have you heard of anything? Because I've heard it being used if you're, say, addicted to alcohol or you're addicted to some other kind of drug, that this has a potential to kind of help you rewire your brain in a sense that you can, kind of just skip over the addictive part. Have you heard anything like this?
No, I have not. Sorry, I have not. The
hippie side of me just came right out at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised that if it's used properly, it could alleviate pain and alleviate some addictions. I wouldn't be surprised.
Trauma is like the big thing.
Yeah.
They think.
Yeah, the trauma. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I had fun times. I tell me, music sounded wonderful, and nature. I had never appreciated nature so much as during that experience, and so for that, I'm grateful for it. Yeah, but I like all fungi. Really, they're all pretty magical.
Good. Yeah, thank you for appreciating my study organisms.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have you back. I'm gonna find some more questions to ask you, and we're gonna check in with you and see what your research is telling us, and if we're gonna be able to stave off the zombie apocalypse with your help. Hopefully.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we actually did not talk quite a bit about the molecular evolutionary questions that you
I know. This is how it goes. Look, I'll have you back next month, and we can do it all again, because I like you, and you're awesome to talk to.
Thank you.
If you're willing, I'll have you back. Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, it's fun to talk to you. You're a very good interviewer. Very good.
I try. We'll end it here, and we'll talk afterwards. Okay.
Yeah. Wonderful.
JP Xu, go ahead. Say your name.
Xu Jianping or JP Xu.
JP Xu, my new friend. He is the Department of Biology at McMaster University. He is the fungi expert. Wonderful human being. Anything you want to add before we go?
No, thank you very much.
All right.
Enjoy your evening.
Yeah, wave goodbye to everybody. Okay, thanks for coming, everybody. Bye.